Who are we? Who are we Palestinians? Why is there a Museum of Palestine? Why isn't there many museums where we could all show our work? Palestine and Palestinian Arabs are a part of a larger Arab world from which they gain a great deal of power. There is been a commitment to visual beauty among the Arabs in their art history. This commitment to visual beauty is unique. It separates into different categories: verbal beauty, the beauty of calligraphy, verbal beauty into poetry, the beauty of calligraphy into visual material, and the visual beauty, pure and simple, that has no other interference. And think about the arts of the other world. This is extremely unique. You go through European art, by and large, it is based on verbal ideas. There are themes, there are anecdotes, there are stories, be they from religion or folklore or fiction, that create and are cause for the visual production. I'm not saying they don't have beauty, but what I'm saying, in the Arab world, there is a focus on aesthetic beauty as a thing in itself, an aesthetic attitude. Now, because Palestinian painting is gaining international presence, there are a lot of people who say its sources are icon painting. And there are those who think the sources of Palestinian painting is European painting. There are two things I have to say about that. One, Palestine and Palestinians have created icons ever since the 3rd or 4th century after Christ. The area of the Arab world, in its history as well as in the medieval Islamic Arab history and the present, is very concerned with abstraction. But pure abstraction came into international global art history for the first time with the birth of Islam. And that is very important. It's very important to me and influences my work profoundly. Now, the reason many people make a mistake about that is because medieval Arab art, medieval Islamic Arab art, was made with precious materials, mostly inlaid precious materials, while contemporary painting is made with pigments on a ground. Well, we artists call it a ground. You've heard it said as canvas. But the change from precious materials to the pigments makes it hard for people to see the aesthetic relationship between one and the other and to see the influences. In Palestine, our national development was co-opted by the British. However, the 20th century, in spite of all of these things, and in spite of the 1948 tragedy, continued to grow and to mature. Painters of the first half of the 20th century, I'm going to show you a few, influenced and laid the groundwork for painters of the Intifada, and painters of the Intifada grew and matured and laid the groundwork for next generation of artists. What is important about the Intifada, art of the Intifada, is to know that it happened at a time of popular resistance and enthusiasm, and that popular resistance gave it a great deal of power and a great deal of artistic power. I want to take you back to the Paris Commune in the 19th century and remind you that the uprising of the Paris Commune is what gave impetus to Impressionism. The Soviet Revolution gave strength and allowed abstraction in the 20th century to be invented in the constructivist painters. And the Mexican mural movement and its motion, the motion of the people behind it, raised the Mexican muralists to great heights. And the same is true in America. The Industrial Union movement of the 40s, an amazing period in American history, gave power and energy to the abstract expressionists, the majority of whom were leftists. Now, I'm not going to show you too many pictures because I don't want to hold you captive, but I think you'll enjoy these. The first painting is, to just contradict myself, happens to be a large icon. Now, these icons have a name. as a group. They're called proskinetaria. They're huge icons. This one is about 10 feet high and 20 feet wide. The painting has an attribution to two painters, master painters, al-Sayegh and master painter Isa Banayut, and 4 assistants to make this huge painting. Now the grandson of al-Sayegh painted the following image. So Nicola very nonchalantly gets some cactus out, cuts it in a knife, and he starts painting it. I don't think he painted it in 5 minutes, but it is a very fast painting, which shows how skilled he was. And done in the 1920s, the Hutzalattimo and the other painters who came early in the 20th century were living in a period of transition as Palestine was moving into becoming a capitalist state. Patronage was shifting from church and Muslim awqaf to private collectors. And so they fell in the cracks between this and this period of time. In this painting, dating from 1936, he is painting his son with a toy car, which is quite a beautiful painting, his son Sulaiman. The next painting I want to show you is Khalil Halaby, and it is of Margerius. That's St. George in English. It is a fresco. So Margerius is from a village called Khadir in Palestine, and the story of the event is a Palestinian folktale. This is a painting by Mubarak Saad, painting the Dome of the Rock. It is based on a photograph, and you look at it and you can see that this was from a period much earlier than the present. You can see the empty landscape behind it and in front of it. Though Mubarak was not necessarily a photorealist, this painting was based on a photograph by someone called Khalil Rad, no relation to the present famous Rad who's had a show at the Museum of Modern Art. And this is Jabra Ibrahim Jabra, not a painter, but one of our very distinguished writers. You can see Palestinian painting going forward, getting more and more modern, joining the more contemporary experiences available from Europe in Paris. Next. I'm showing you Jamal Badran, a little bit out of order by date. Jamal happened to be an artist who spanned both halves of the 20th century. He was an artist of geometric abstraction as well as illusion. He was so experienced in both of them that he was given by the Muslim awqaf foundations the job of renovating the minbar of Salah ad-Din that was destroyed by a settler in 1969. In this picture, you see him studying a drawing of one of the faces, and the photograph is dated 1971. Next. And this is one of his works, which contradicts the other kind of painting, or let's say it's a different kind of painting than what I've showed you. First half of the 20th century in Palestine, many things came together. The old forms and the new forms were mixing, and they were getting there into a point where they were influencing the future. So this by Jamal Badran, as well as the calligraphy, of which I didn't show you any, influenced the next generation. Among the next generation was this artist, Ismail Shammoud. Now I talked about teacher, students, student becomes teacher, etc. Zalattimo, when he went to teach at what is equivalent to a high school, he had Ismail Shammoud as a student. 1948 comes, and Ismail with his family is forced into the march through the wilderness, of which I hope all of you have read about, the history of Palestine. Israelis came and with guns forced everybody in the streets, and some of them had the wisdom to take a little water and some money and jewelry in their pockets, but they were all used to the British, who came with guns and said everyone out in the street, and usually they let them back. But this time they didn't let them back. They forced them into the wilderness and they forced them to march. Ismail and his family in this painting are dying of thirst, so is everybody else around them. In the film, he tells us the story of how he went looking for water, how Israeli soldiers followed, how when he finally got some water, they shot it out of his hand. He goes looking for some more, he finds a tin can, he manages to fill it with water. There's so much struggle in the water, his shirt gets wet with it. He comes and he gives a sip of water to his mother. He's standing there, he's the older boy standing in the painting. The little boy next to the mother eventually dies of thirst before they get to their destination in Gaza. Ismail Shammoud is wearing a wet shirt, and you notice a woman behind him seeming to kiss him. No, she's trying to suck water out of his wet shirt. Next. Another artist of the Intifada was Ahmed Naresh. This painting is a crucifixion. And I take note, and it's very interesting, that the crucifixion is a theme in Palestinian art. It's as though it's always been there. I know it's part of the biblical story, but everybody practices it naturally, not thinking, as though it is just a symbol of oppression. The crucifixion is of human rights. And above the man crucified is another head, which he is saying, this is the other person that we carry with us, our altar. And then he says about the man in red behind him, he says, this one who struggles and is still alive and whose body is half hidden behind a curtain of darkness, he is like all of us who were exiled and scattered. Next. And this amazing monument was by two artists commemorating Day of the Land, which just passed. The artist is Abed Abdi, and it is done in collaboration with his Israeli comrade from the Communist Party, whose name is Gershon Knispel. It is in the form of a memorial sarcophagus for 6 martyrs of the Day of the Land, and it was set up in 1978, though they began working on it much earlier. The Day of the Land commemorates a massacre that took place in Sakhnin in 1976, where the Israelis opened fire on demonstrators, injuring 100 and killing 6. Now they think nothing of killing 30 and injuring 1,500. That's become their game. It was a time of revolution, and when the CP and the other Palestinian organization called for a demonstration, Sakhnin became the hub of a very active, angry crowds, angry about the commandeering by Israel of 5,000 acres of Palestinian agricultural land. Next. This is an image by Mustafa AlHanlon. Mustafa is a Palestinian artist from the area around Jaffa, who traveled to Egypt, and when he was in Egypt studying art, he said, I was sitting in the arms of Amenhotep and I heard the radio and it called me to the revolt in Beirut. So he carried himself and went to Beirut. He heard the song of the revolution, so he went. This is maybe the widest print in history. It is 98 meters, and it is a continuous image. It goes on, and here at the Station Museum, when we had the Made in Palestine exhibition, it was exhibited in toto. A section of that painting, you see Mustafa in the middle. And Mustafa, the painting is called Self-Portrait in the form of a man, a god, and a devil. So he has himself 3 times in the painting. Mustafa used to wake up in the morning every day, get all the folklore he could from all over the world and read about it. And he was very interested in African folklore, which you can see in many places. Now, in the lower right hand, you see a bearded man bending over with boxes on his head. And in front of him is a bird with a big box on its head. Well, Mustafa, what is this? Explain it to me. I wish he explained the whole thing. He said, well, the hudhud has a bump on his head, and he's smelly. So folklore says that therefore he buried his mother on his head. And what is this man bending over? And of course, it looks like Mustafa. And he says, well, these are all the artists we've lost in the struggle, and they are inside us as other artists. We carry them with us. And what's on his back are the coffins of all our brothers and sister artists who died. So I carry them with me on my back. Next. I said there are those artists who explain Palestine to the West. This is Emily Jasser. The title of the item is very important. It is memorial to the 418 Palestinian villages which were destroyed, depopulated, and occupied by Israel in 1948. And here I have Raji Cook, a piece which I think is very poignant. So he has a barbed wire nest and egg, and you can imagine the kind of what he's saying. You know, he's saying we are birth of a nation in spite of all the pain that's applied. It's a very beautiful image. The image outside that is making such a splash, of course, is a work of genius. The idea of comparing the use of bullets to the use of stones makes it very, very clear what the two sides are and what they're about. Next is Slimane Mansour. Slimane Mansour is one of Palestine's major painters, and his work mostly comes from the time of the Intifada, which was 70s, 80s, but he's still alive and he continues to paint, still very vibrant. And in these paintings, this one is called The Wall. And you can see the wall, and next to it, all agricultural things, all things are dead. Now, that may seem to you like a metaphor, but I experienced that. I was interviewing some peasants next to a wall, which was placed right through their agricultural land. And the old woman doing the digging, she told me, you know, I can't grow anything here. Why? She said at 4 o'clock, the shadow the wall casts is so far that nothing grows. After 4 o'clock, I don't have sunshine. So she's experiencing exactly what Slimane is painting here. And the next one is a very powerful image. Just as a painting, it is very compelling. This is titled Checkpoint, and they both date from 2011. I'm taking a guess they're oil on canvas, which is what Slimane uses. So thank you for listening. I'm delighted that I had you as an audience to speak to. And I turn the podium over to our host. Oh, good.